Yes, this is a 3-part video. On principle, I refuse to monetize them. To the YouTube employee vetting feedback, enjoy getting paid to watch them, but unless I underestimate how high in the company YPP feedback goes, you're not who needs to see it. The contents of this video of the 3 is as follows. My response to YouTube's email correspondence that will not fit in 1,000 characters or less, and how my experience as a game dev allows understanding and insight into YouTube's code, systems, and feedback assessment as an objective third party. Part 2 will be an exploration of some of the system-level edge cases and anomalous behavior I've observed. The specific discussions involving machine learning, neural network, and such are far too much to cover in one video, but I'll touch on it. I will also attempt to break down why people get confused and irritated by YouTube's changes or policy enforcement, most notably the way the policies are communicated. Spoilers. The average end user at best skims any terms and conditions. Messaging should be very concise and easily accessible to the public if it will result in repercussions, especially ones that are visible to people who never had the policies presented to them. Part 3 is just going to be a run-through of YouTube's search and discovery video as a talking point. After I drop the links to all 3 in the 1,000 character or less feedback box, I'm curious to see what will happen. It should be fun. To be clear, I'm making this video, and any follow-up video correspondence with the platform, public videos, because, put simply, why not? 1,000 characters is a bit low for meaningful feedback, and until I sign an NDA outlining what YouTube doesn't want me to talk about, I see no reason to avoid an open, honest, data-driven conversation about the platform, my experiences, and my analytics after releasing around 800 videos, including streams so far, because it's a fun hobby. Also, for science! Worth noting, I have compared notes with a statistically significant number of other small channels to ensure there was correlation, even if there is no causation. So, my communications thus far with YouTube have been completion of one ridiculous survey and, months later, monetizing specifically to have the opportunity to directly discuss my observations, data, and experience via the partner program's direct email support. Their reply was only partially corpo standardized fluff, and I'm fairly certain I wasn't reading an AI-generated response, which makes me feel like there's a chance they'll sit down to the table and talk. So, before I get to the meat of the video, in partial response to their email, I will explain why I have no intention to apply for a job with Google in the best possible way. Oi, YouTube chummas. Don't get it twisted. I'm a Shadowrunner. I don't like corpse, and I'm certainly not going to sell my soul to one. But, if the arrangement's mutually beneficial, I have no problem working with you, or with Mr. Johnson to pursue your interests while you maintain plausible deniability. No creds needed to talk, and I'm not looking for any pay data. Script and corp secrets are worthless to me. You know how to reach me, but I only deal with meat. Don't try to pass software off as an avatar. With that cleared up, let's move into the first point of discussion. In game development, as with any other effort to make an experience for an end user, one of the major methods of gathering data is from testing and user feedback. These are absolutely necessary, but there are a few noteworthy traps that can really muddy things and slow or prevent improvements from being made. The first trap is the most visible. Perception is reality. This goes two ways. If you have a perception of a situation before you start looking at the data, your interpretation of that data will potentially be influenced by that perception. Likewise, if you make a decision based on data that is poorly communicated or the connection between cause and effect are not clear to the public, for example, if you're protecting trade secrets like how your search engine functions, the reality of the results is going to look completely different than what people actually see. This is, in my estimation, the biggest cause of YouTuber outrage and a lot of the hate that YouTube as a platform gets. The answer can't be the full details of the system that makes YouTube work because bad actors exist that will then twist the understanding into the newest abuse case that YouTube will then have to change their systems to address. Keep this in mind later because I'm fairly certain a lot of the PR and systemic problems YouTube has faced and will continue to face come from this situation. The second trap, and probably the most common for a big company like YouTube, is the telephone effect. That thing that happens when you line up X number of people and the words whispered into the first person's ear are absolutely nothing like what comes out at the other end. The more people involved and the more complex the message, the more things get distorted. This also is linked with volume of data because the more you try to compress things into digestible packets to for example, pass up the chain to the people with more authority, yeah, that results in data being distorted as well. While documents to pass around, like this video, can potentially help keep the information clear, it is always something to keep in mind while assessing data in general. The third trap, and I believe the most dangerous, is asking the wrong questions. There are many facets to it, including the question itself potentially altering the feedback, the testing being undermined by the assumptions or communication involved in the asking of the question, and, in my opinion, the worst offender of all, the options available to answer the question themselves, making the situation far worse than just not asking the question. A very simple example of this is asking something along the lines of, oh, I don't know, what best describes your relationship with YouTube? And having a list of responses that, you know what, just look. This is never going to create meaningful, actionable data. And keeping in mind this is not an exhaustive list, the fourth trap is very, very common, both from people who really want to accommodate other people, regardless of the intent of that accommodation, as well as from people who don't fully know how things work on the ground. Most often a top-down organization issue. In my humble opinion, the end user's feelings matter. Their sentiments matter. Their arguments, specific thoughts, and suggestions are essentially meaningless unless centered in, at the very least, anecdotal evidence. I could pull a ton of hypothetical examples of bad feedback being submitted with good intentions out of my mind, but by approaching feedback and data with objectivity and understanding that the end user or tester's feelings are valid, but only within their subjective experience, a lot of cure the symptoms, hide the disease issues can be avoided. Testers and end users very rarely know what actually needs to happen to correct their perception of a fault in the system. The other point of discussion for this video I'll keep somewhat brief, as video 2 of 3 will cover several related points in much more depth. Any sufficiently complex system has to be carefully implemented when the input to the system will be incredibly dynamic and inconsistent. An example, the solutions that will work for a channel that has 100,000 subscribers is rarely, if ever, going to function correctly for a channel that has 1,000. The code of any system-level operation must include sanity checks and allowances for the input of datasets large, small, or anywhere in between. If the system itself cannot be created in such a way that all extremities of valid inputs can be handled with equal success, it is up to the designers and programmers of said system to ensure there are carefully crafted supplemental systems to address these edge cases and, as appropriate, branch off from the main systems in balanced, logical, and practical ways. In game development terms, it is very common for someone who has been deep in their code to not notice bugs through alpha and beta testing, then have a surge of bug reports when they launch the game. The worst thing you can do is to just pretend that the 1% of players who are experiencing and reporting the bugs aren't a priority, because the number of players who aren't even going to report the bugs before refunding or quitting without ever giving you a second chance will always be a much larger percentile than the ones who are vocal about the issues. That said, it's much less of a concern for a game dev than it is for a company that relies on new talent and a younger generation embracing their platform to survive the eventual and inevitable retirement or downfall of the old guard.